Hello, Daylight Church Online. I'm H.L. Hussman. I'm the lead pastor here at Daylight, and we just want to say thanks for tuning into our broadcast and being a part of our online community. We've been brainstorming ways that we can effectively and efficiently connect more with people in remote locations that are watching us online, and I have a few opportunities I'd like you to know about. Number one, if you would introduce yourself, we would love to know you. You can email online@daylightchurch.com. That's online@daylightchurch.com. Just tell us who you are, where you're watching from, how you found out about us, and any other relevant information that you wanted to share. We would love that opportunity. Secondly, we have a website, mydaylightchurch.com, and on that website is a tab that says Join the Daylight Crew. There's things that you can do off-site that would benefit us and allow you to engage more with the community. You can join our prayer team and our prayer ministry. You can join our study team and our service team. You can join our small groups, and we're happy to Zoom you in. There's all kinds of opportunities on that tab, and we would appreciate if you would fill it out and make yourself known to us. If you believe that Daylight is kind of your home away from home and you don't have a faith community of your own and you would like to support and be a part of this financially, you can do so at daylightchurch.com/giving or by texting the number 84321 and completing a short form and selecting Daylight Church as the place you're going to give. Whoa, hold on a second. Before we move on to the service, I want to tell you about an opportunity that you have to get involved in one of our service projects. Next month, right here in this room, about 160 pastors and church leaders are going to file in. And we're wanting to provide them with a personalized letter, a handwritten letter of encouragement during what has been pretty difficult times for pastors over the last couple of years. If you'd like more information on how you can personalize a letter and bless a pastor or minister, you can do so before September 5th by emailing us at online@daylightchurch.com. Just tell us that you're interested in knowing more, and we will send you the instructions right back and get you involved. If there's any way we can serve you, we would love the opportunity, and you can always reach us at online@daylightchurch.com. Thanks, and enjoy the service. Good morning, Daylighters. How is everybody? Good to see you. We appreciate you being here. We know that there's pandemics and NFL preseason games and all kinds of stuff that you could be enjoying this morning, and we appreciate you taking time to be in church. I'm in a weird sermon hole right now in that we've been talking about the pillars of the church and where we go post-COVID, and now post-COVID doesn't quite feel like post-COVID. It feels like kind of intermediary COVID. It's just a very strange place to be. And one of the things I wanted to do for the rest portion of our four pillars, our pillars, if you're unfamiliar with Daylight Church or you're watching online, are service, study, worship, and rest. And we've covered service, study, and worship so far. And I wanted to cover rest this week, but I had a special guest that I wanted to participate in that service that couldn't make it this week and got pushed to 2 weeks from now, which is going to be an awesome service you definitely don't want to miss. But I was left in kind of this, you've heard of a show hole. Well, I was left in a sermon hole, and which was actually on Tuesday when I realized this, it was pretty exciting to me. I can talk about whatever I want. That's pretty fantastic. And I started, for whatever reason, thinking about social media and how people use social media, and which can be a depressing or encouraging thing depending on how you look at it. But I notice every single person that pops up on social media has a different kind of mystique about them. One of my favorite people online is Paul's wife, Becky. Becky tends to post insightful stuff with wisdom and compassion, and as I look around the room, I see people, and I know how you post. But what are some ways that people use social media? People post pictures of their cats. I mean, some people their entire web presence is cats. What are some other ways people use social media? To rant about what? Anything and everything. Okay, trolls, right? What else? Meals? News. Got it. The mask makes it difficult. News, yeah. So current events is pretty popular on social media. What else? Family stuff. Religion. Parties or announcements. I've noticed food and travel come up a lot, and it seems like if you hang out on social media, you'll think everybody's eating better than you and everybody's traveling more than you, right? But I have a cousin named Rick, and Rick, he's a political guy in a sense. A lot of his posts are political commentary, but he parses them out and spreads them out between memes. And most of his political commentary is meme-based, or a lot of it is, and then he'll include an article every now and then. But probably 70% of what he posts is just funny memes, like just stuff that gets a chuckle out of you. And I don't post LOL very often because I think it's kind of a lie, because typically I didn't actually laugh out loud. But COL, chuckle out loud, might be more accurate. So he'll post stuff that makes you chuckle. This one I found particularly funny. He said, saying have a nice day to someone sounds friendly, but saying enjoy your next 24 hours sounds threatening. Isn't that great? So I'm doing a sermon today called Memes, and this may be Memes Part 1, where I'm going to pull a bunch of memes from my friends' Facebook accounts, and we're going to talk about them from kind of a Christian pastoral perspective. So it's almost like 4 or 5 mini sermons, and my hope is that you'll get something out of today. I don't know if this is the weirdest idea I've ever had or if it's just brilliant, but hopefully you'll walk away with something new. Rick also posted this one where a concerned flyer says, how often do planes crash? And the stewardess, of course, says, well, just once. Which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Becky and Rick, the two people I've mentioned actually, ironically, which I didn't plan for, both posted this meme this week, which I want to talk about briefly. This is sermon number 1. It says, I'm done being an expert in vaccines. This week, I'm a foreign policy specialist. And of course, we're referring to COVID and the vaccinations and all the questions about whether you should or shouldn't be vaccinated and whether the vaccines are safe or not. And everybody has their opinion, and many people present their opinions and their ideas as if they were vaccine specialists that have studied it their whole lives, right? But this week, we've got Afghanistan and the foreign policy decisions that have been made in Afghanistan, and all of a sudden, we've left vaccines behind, and now we're an expert in foreign policy. And I wanted to stop and, for my first mini sermon, talk about intellectual humility for just a second, because I think we could, as a country and as people, use a good dose of it. We've talked about in Philippians 2, the canonic verses of Scripture, how it tells us something almost redundant in its repetition. It says, it addresses the church, and the church is supposed to be united with Christ, if any comfort in his love, if any common sharing. So we've got united, common sharing in the Spirit, like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one mind. One mind, one spirit, one love, like-minded, common sharing, united. He's really driving some point home here. And we've emphasized what that one point is, because a lot of times we ask, what are we supposed to be united as in a church? Like, what are the flags that we plant versus the hills that we're not worth dying on? And he sums that up just right after that. So he says, be united in this idea with one mind, one spirit, one body, and so forth. And he says, here's the thing you ought to be united about. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. So I want to highlight this word humility, because humility includes kind of an intellectual humility. Our pillars around here are service, study, worship, and rest, and each one of those have grounding in humility. Jesus talks a whole lot about how humility, that if you seek to obtain and hold on to your life, you'll lose it, but if you'll seek to let go of your life, you'll find it, and how the humble will be made high and the proud will be made low. And humility is certainly a virtue in Scripture continuously from beginning to end. And so a lot of times we're told to worship God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if we tie all this together, it means we're supposed to have some kind of humility in all those areas. Humility of heart, humility of soul, humility of strength, which would be service. But humility of mind is something that maybe we buck against because we kind of think we know it all. And so I want to give you 5 real quick, we'll see, tips on kind of how to and when to speak up on divisive and polarizing issues. Because we live in a meme-based society where everybody thinks a meme solves the problems of the world, so they throw it on their page or they throw it in their social media or they spout what they read in a meme as if it's supposed to conclude an argument. And I want you to start asking the question, and I encourage online people to start asking this question, and I hope it's a question that I'm asking myself is, are you well studied? Anytime somebody speaks up on foreign policy or vaccines or sexuality, or the nature of the atonement, or whatever the hot topic is, abortion, or race, or whatever the polarizing hot topic of the day is, anytime somebody speaks up, I always want to ask, how much have you read? And every now and then I'm bold enough to do that in a conversation, and you do it kind of subtly, but when somebody says, comes off with a persona as if they know everything, it's an important question to say, how well studied are you? How much have you read? In Proverbs, it says, give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. And so I think it's an important question we ask ourselves when we look at foreign policy, for example. Have we read 2 news articles, and now we think we understand everything about Afghanistan? It's probably not accurate. it's probably not well thought out to think that you know now. And so here's what I encourage you to do. I encourage you to spend a lot more time listening and learning rather than instructing. And it doesn't mean you can't ever instruct. It doesn't mean you can't ever interject an opinion. But it does mean that we ought to be people who want to understand the topic at hand. And so that brings us to the second point, which is, do you understand the best arguments of both sides? There's a proverb that says, the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. Have you ever read an article and thought, well, that makes sense, and then you read another article and said, well, now the first article doesn't make sense. Then you read another article, and the second article suddenly doesn't make sense. And it's the crucible of knowledge that you're going through at that point, and it's an important crucible to go through, is that you understand the arguments. And understanding, in some sense, it breeds love, and listening breeds love. And I want to talk briefly about what it means to attack strawmen. So you've heard of the strawman fallacy, and the strawman fallacy means somebody presents an argument, and you attack a different argument related to the argument because the different argument is easier to attack. And so, real simple example, if one spouse says to the other, we should budget for a gym membership, and the second spouse says, you think I'm fat. That's a straw man, right? It's not a question about the budget or whether you ought to be healthy or not. This is easier to attack. It's easier to jump in on. If somebody says, let's buy a dog, and you say, why do you hate cats? You've now attacked a straw man. But let's break it down. Let's do some more current events with this. If a person says, I worry because the vaccines were rushed, and the second person says, you only care about yourself. You see, they're not looking at the argument of, well, the vaccines were rushed, and they moved fast. They called it Operation Lightning Speed, for goodness sake. And it's a legitimate concern, but nobody wants to address the concern, so they attack. It's almost an ad hominem in the straw man. It's attacking the person. It's attacking the virtue behind the question. It's setting up the person who would even ask such a question as an enemy of the people, right? But then on the other side of the aisle, so that would represent one side of the aisle when it comes to vaccines. If on the other side of the aisle somebody says vaccines save lives, and somebody who's anti-vaccine says, oh, you're a communist, that's a straw man as well. And so we've learned not to really dive into, do vaccines save lives, and were they rushed, and should we be concerned? Are they helpful? We avoid those by putting people in camps and attacking the camps. And I want to encourage you, when a topic is brought up, when a meme is brought up with something important inside, look at what's important. Don't immediately jump into who's... And even as I preach this, the straw man against my sermon could be, HL doesn't want anybody to take a stand against anything. That's a straw man, because that's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is, when you're presented with an argument, approach the argument. Approach the actual argument. Look at and give people the benefit of the doubt of learning their best argument, not dismissing their worst argument. It has a lot to do with intellectual humility, because to seek to understand is to show love. And also, to seek to understand is wise. Let's say ultimately your goal is to compel someone. Your goal is to persuade someone. So, in the first example, just as a simple one, you should budget for a gym membership. Spouse number 2 says, well, I really don't want to spend the money, and I don't want a gym membership. I have better ideas than that. Would they be better served saying, oh, you think I'm fat, and getting angry and attacking a straw man? Or would they be better served to sit down and say, here's why I don't think we can fit it in the budget. Here's why I think we don't need it. Here's how we can exercise elsewhere. Here's how I can take care of my... Which seems wiser? See, attacking a straw man is never wise. If your goal is persuasion, if your goal is to compel someone in a particular direction, attacking a straw man isn't wise. It's wise to listen. It's wise to hear. It's wise to love. And I would say this, some of these topics deserve way, way more than a hand wave. The vaccine deserves way more than a meme. Race deserves way more than a meme. Sexuality deserves way more than a meme. Abortion deserves way more than a meme. All the hot topics, these are real topics that really affect people. And a loving person recognizes that, and a wise person recognizes it. Question number 3 is, have you taken the appropriate time? I saw this meme. Theology 101, it's foolish to change your mind after you, quote, read a book on it, or 2 or 3. Take your time. It sometimes takes months or years to weigh all the facts. And then they quoted the same proverb that I quoted earlier. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. You don't have to have all the answers right now, and you never will. It's okay to exist in a state of perpetual questioning. It's okay to exist in a state of perpetual curiosity and seeking understanding. You don't have to have the answers right now. Even when it comes to your spirituality, and there's 2 types of lemmings when it comes to spirituality, and probably more types. There's some people who are spiritual, faith-based lemmings because they've believed what their mom and dad said, and they'll always believe it, and they just believe it. God said it, therefore it's true, and I put my stamp of approval on it, and I'm not going to think at all about it. And then there's people who are deconstructing atheists that are lemmings because they read an article or 2 and said, oh yeah, God causes suffering. I'm gonna hold on to that and not let go. And I would say no kind of lemming is the kind of person you want to be. You want to be a person who is well-studied, well-thought, has thought out the arguments, has thought out your faith, has questioned your faith, has searched for truth, and arrived at a conclusion. And it doesn't have to be a conclusion you're certain of, but it's a conclusion that you are compelled to believe, or a conclusion that you're confident in. And so when it comes to Afghanistan, for example, if you have read nothing about foreign policy, if you up until now you didn't really know much at all about what was going on in Afghanistan, and all of a sudden you consider yourself an expert, I would say you need to take some time. If you think you're an expert in vaccines because for the last few months you've questioned it and done some meme reading, I would say take some time. I was talking to a friend yesterday who was actually questioning the vaccine. His work has mandated that he takes it, and he has concerns about it being rushed and some other medical concerns that he's read about, and he was calling me for my opinion on it. But during this, I was excited about his approach to it. He and I may not end up on the same page as far as whether to have the vaccine or not. My family and I chose to take the vaccine, and if you're interested in why we did that, I'm happy to have that conversation. I would love to have that conversation. And this person may decide not to. He may decide to give up his job because he considers there to be some liberty issues involved with the risks behind the vaccine. And so, but one of the things we talked about is the approach to it is to study, to read, to care about the answers, to care about people, and so forth. And we talked about sort of being forged in the fires of accumulated knowledge and healthy argumentation. So many people want to avoid an argument, and argumentation actually legitimately changes the world when it's done right, when it's done well. And so we've got to get away from our fear of healthy, logical argumentation. But the problem is we think trolling someone is an argument nowadays, and that's not what an argument is. An argument is looking at the facts, comparing the facts, and coming to good conclusions. So have you taken the appropriate time? And finally, is your contribution helpful? There's a passage in Ephesians that was one of my first memory verses. It says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. So when you respond to whatever the topic is at hand, is your goal learning or helping, or is it denigrating or dominating? In other words, are you trying to advance the conversation? Are you trying to compel someone or persuade someone in a healthy way? Or are you trying to exert that you are correct? You're trying to exert that you are right, or that they are wrong. And it's somewhat of an emotional power play that happens. A lot of trolling, that's exactly what it is. It's emotional power play. There's an author named Tim Muehlhoff that's written several books called I Beg to Differ, Winsome Conviction, and Winsome Communication. And they're all about how to argue well, how to argue intelligently. And he talked about a study that they did where the vast majority of participants said they had no desire to engage another person's perspective on sensitive issues. They merely wanted to voice their opinion. He said only 5% of the people surveyed in this particular study showed that they actually legitimately wanted to argue and argue well, to compel and to persuade. 95% in general wanted to dominate, wanted to exert that they were correct, that being correct and being on the right side of the aisle was more important than coming to the correct conclusions for a lot of people. And I would say that's pretty universal, and we need to guard ourselves against it. How you doing for sermon number 1 so far? Is your contribution appropriate? Not only is it helpful, but is now the right time? Is this the right place? Are you a person of influence in this person's life? Do you have permission to speak in their lives? Do you have credibility? All these questions that I think. So ultimately, what all this comes down to is, on the hot topics, pause. On the hot topics, think. On the hot topics, study. Show empathy. Show compassion. Learn instead of educate, unless you are the uber educated. Learn together. There's a relational aspect to this thing that's missing. When we try to dominate or denigrate, we also destroy relationship. But when we try to learn, we typically learn together. And so relationship happens as we adjust ourselves to have intellectual humility. I saw this meme. I was told recently that I'm actually supposed to look at this camera. Is this the right camera? Because apparently on our live broadcast, it's framed this way, so this is the one that shows up. So if I look over here, I'm just staring off into space. So sorry about that, Booker. Here we go. I value our relationship, so I'm going to post a passive-aggressive status update on our social network site instead of confronting you directly. Well, that's because I talked really, really fast. Yes. Thank you for calling me out on it. I value our relationship, so I'm going to post a passive-aggressive status update on a social networking site instead of confronting you directly. Okay, you're on it now. You got so many people on social media, they post things like, "I'm so sick of people these days." What does that even mean? Why don't we talk about what we're talking? Paul posted a very direct post this week about a guy. He was out biking, and a guy almost hit him and gave him the middle finger as he drove by, but he said, "Man, stop it. You're a jerk." And sometimes we need direct conversation. Winsome and direct beats passive-aggressive every time. Jesus said this in Matthew 18. He says, "If your brother sins against you, go to him. Go to her." This is sort of sermon number 2 that morphs out of sermon number 1. I know these memes are a little hard to read in the back of the room, so I will try to be more careful. This one from Compassionate Reminder says, "Many relationships would be a lot healthier if we romanticized honest, open, and direct communication instead of idealizing the idea of a partner who's intuitively in tune with your every need." You don't need someone who can read your mind. You just need someone who's willing to listen when you speak. I've been in counseling, and I've done enough counseling to know that gentle, compassionate, but direct communication works miracles. If in your relationship you're expecting your partner to read your mind and understand you, if you're expecting the interwebs to get you because you've posted something passive-aggressive, you're probably living in a fairy tale. We need people who can communicate well, who can say what's on their mind, who understand boundaries, and who understand love. That was it. When it comes to your emotional health, this whole idea of meme-based living is not going to help your emotional health at all. The ability to articulate what you want to say, to think and say, will change your life forever if you learn to set proper boundaries. Another meme I saw on Rick's site, which I thought was really fantastic, was this sheet that says, which says, "Do you want to learn to play the banjo?" And all the tear-off cards at the bottom say, "No thanks." I thought this was great. Shaquille O'Neal says, "I can't end my messages with love, Shaq, because the B-52s ruined that for me." Sermon number 2.5 or 3. Because children grow up, we think a child's purpose is to grow up. But a child's purpose is to be a child. Yesterday, we were at the Peddler's Mall. We're shopping for furniture and outdoor furniture for our house. And my wife and I were at Peddler's Mall with our 2 youngest, Judson and Riggs. And it was like a carnival to them. I mean, they were just... At one point, I said, "Before you touch anything, ask me if you can touch it." And then I realized real quickly this was the biggest mistake of my life, because Riggs would say, "Can I touch that? Can I touch that? Can I touch that?" And he followed me around saying, "Can I touch that?" And every third, I'd say, "No, no, no." And every third or fourth time I'd say yes, and he'd go, "Thank you, Daddy." And he'd touch it. But at one point, and we were at Peddler's Mall, which was a big place, and we were shopping and taking our time. And at one point, Riggs was off. Riggs will walk away. He doesn't care if he's with you or not. He can be 100 yards away in a totally different aisle behind some furniture, and he doesn't care whether you're there or not, so we have to keep our eye on him. At some point, I said, Riggs, don't touch that and come here. And a mom nearby said, oh, let the kid be a kid, which I thought, who are you? So I smacked her in the face, as a pastor would. But then I thought of my sermon and thought, okay, well, I'm sorry I smacked you, and I apologized. Okay, so all this actually happened in my brain. But there's some truth to letting a kid be a kid. And then there's also some truth to allowing that into our own lives. That mentality of cutting ourselves some slack. We have this mentality before God that we have to add up and we have to perform. Rusty last week talked about moving on to maturity. Remember that? He said one of the goals of a church is to help people reach maturity in Christ. And so it says, therefore, let us move beyond the elementary teachings about Christ and be taken forward to maturity. But then elsewhere, Jesus says this. He says, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And these two thoughts seem to be at odds a little bit until you understand that reaching maturity in Christianity is to reach a sort of childlikeness. It's to reach a childlike state of dependence. When Jesus said, become like a child, what do you think? What are kids like? What do you think he meant by that? Anybody? Trusting, innocent, inquisitive. What's that? Wonder and awe. Absolutely. Dependent. Very good. Any other thoughts? They like to touch things. I don't know how to respond to that. Curious. And so there's this whole package that we recognize as virtue buried in kind of a childishness. And yet we do what this meme says. This was Martin Luther. He said, the sin underneath all our sins is to trust the lie of the serpent that we cannot trust the love and grace of Christ. And we must take matters into our own hands. We think we got to grow up. We think we've got to get it all together. We've got to perform well. We've got to serve and study and worship and rest in adequate amounts. And in some sense, that's the exact opposite of Christian maturity. In some sense, Christian maturity is this. It's I think it was Ernie in the back. I can't tell in the lights. It said dependence. It's recognizing who's really important in this. We're important, but who's top dog in this conversation, and it's not us. I was talking to my kid. So I was in this sermon hole, and I was sitting around the table with my kids, and I said, what should I preach about this Sunday? And Siler immediately said, chickens. And I said, that's dumb. And I moved on to Elena. And Elena said, tell them about how much God loves them and how good he is to them. And do you see that simple Jesus loves me, this I know sort of mentality it is? It's this she can hop in our bed with us, and nowadays she'll say, tickle my back, which means she wants to pull her shirt up to here and she wants you to lightly rub her back. And she can do that with us and feel totally confident and safe in those moments. And somehow I think we're supposed to emulate that mentality when it comes to our relationship with God, is that we can, not literally, clearly, but we can jump in bed and say, tickle my back. We don't have to be perfect at all times. We don't have to be right at all times. I think God is comfortable letting his children be his children. Doesn't mean you don't grow up. Again, don't attack a straw man here. Don't say, well, HL said we all got to you can do anything you want. Anything you want goes because we're all kids. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that these traits of awe and wonder, like Tim brought up, these traits of trust, these traits of dependence, this is maturity. And you'll see that they're not performance-based. They're kind of based in being. They're kind of based in some sort of existential satisfaction. There's a band called Halloway that wrote lyrics that say, breathe, just breathe, and take a breath and breathe in me. And in some sense, being God's child is enough. You are enough. Another meme, this guy's been drinking fit tea. This is a before and after picture. It says, in only 6 weeks of drinking fit tea, Robert lost $500. This one really made me laugh. I don't know if it will you or not, but he says, I wear my son's glasses at night. Tied into what we've been talking about is this other meme. It says, it feels counterintuitive, but it says the more we acquainted we, it should say the more we are acquainted with our brokenness and woundedness, the more we open up the possibility of wholeness and healing. The moment we recognize that we are children of God and a child is allowed to be a child, the closer we are to everything being right in the world. And I haven't shared the whole story. I've shared the whole story with my small group and with my wife and maybe with a handful of others, but I was in a tragic scuba diving mishap about 6 weeks ago at this point and came very, very close to dying. They called an ambulance. They put me on oxygen, the whole works. I was at 100 feet in the very, very dark, cold water when my gear went bad. It redlined. I was out of breath, and through some stupid mistakes of my own, I was a little out of my element and away from my dive buddies, so I didn't have an alternate source of oxygen. I had to ditch my gear, and when I ditched my gear, it ripped my regulator out of my mouth, so now I'm at 100 feet in the cold with no breath, and I've got to get to the top, and I kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked, and the whole time I'm thinking, this could be where I die. I don't know why that was what was in my mind. I've confessed to my pastor friends and to my wife and others, I didn't think about Jesus during this time. I didn't think about my wife and kids. My life did not flash before my eyes. I just remember the dark cold and thinking, this could be it. This might be it. Kick, 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 kick. And I got to the point where I was going, like you see in the movies. And then it was warm and bright, and I was out. And they hooked me up to oxygen and called the paramedics. And that night, it was a Saturday night, I had to preach the next morning. This was Saturday afternoon. And that night I didn't sleep at all. I kept waking up in two moments. One was when I looked at my regulator. When I looked at my gear. And I didn't have my eyeglasses on, and so it was pretty blurry, but I was pretty sure I'd gone from 2,800 PSI to 500 PSI like that. And I heard from behind me, and I'm reaching to try to figure out where the bubbles are coming from, seeing if I can adjust something and try to make it work, and I can't. But that night, trying to sleep, I kept reliving that moment, and I kept reliving the moment where my BC fell out, my buoyancy control device fell away and ripped my regulator out of my mouth. Those two moments were just shockingly adrenaline rushed and terrifying, and I kept living them over and over. In fact, just last week, I was walking down this hallway in the back of the church, and both the doors were closed, and I was shutting down the church, and I turned off the lights, and now I'm walking down a dark hallway, and I'm back in the water. And it's just I don't know what neuronic pathways, is that right? What neurons in my brain have fused together, but I have this ability to go back to those moments, and so right afterwards, I thought, well, how do you avoid PTSD? Because this was a very, very traumatic moment in my life. And so I started reading. I started studying how do you avoid PTSD. And I'm no expert. I've read The Body Keeps the Score and some other tomes on the ideas. But what I found, which was shocking, was virtually every expert in the field says relive the moment. It says don't try to suppress the moment. Relive the moment. You've got to go back. You've got to think about what you felt. You've got to think about what occurred. You've got to think about what happened afterwards. You've got to think about, and primarily you've got to think about the fact that you survived. And so the goal behind this psychiatric idea is that when you relive the moments, but you relive them in a safe place, your body readjusts and recognizes that now you are safe, and PTSD can be not avoided, diminished. And so I don't remember what my point is in the sermon here, except to say there's this passage in Philippians that says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And so when we go back to this meme that says, the more we become acquainted with our brokenness and woundedness, the more we end up with the possibility of wholeness and healing. And I think psychiatrically, when it comes to the neurons in your brain, there's some truth to it, but I think spiritually there's some truth to it too, is whatever the stuff is that grips you. I think about Shay Founder right now, and Shay's an educator here in town, and you're the principal of your school, right? Assistant principal. And it is a hard time to be an assistant principal. I mean, there have been some hard times throughout history, but this has got to be up there as far as kind of the polarization of parents and the polarization of kids and making good decisions and you have to make your own personal decisions, but you also have to make decisions for a whole lot of people. And there's a lot of weight on these decisions. These decisions about masking and social distancing and vaccination and whether to have live services and how to navigate with your teachers through all this. I just can't imagine the burden that's on him and some other educators right now. But I say all that to say, Shay and anybody else who, for whatever reason right now, is feeling that pressure, that weight. You're at the bottom of the water, you're kicking. Whatever it is, go ahead and process that with God. Go ahead and take time and sit down and say, God, this is what I'm facing. Go back to those moments or go into those moments, dive into them and become acquainted with your brokenness and woundedness and be a child. So last week, my son Riggs came in and it was bleeding all over the floor. And I said, what happened? He said, there was a knife and it got me. And I don't know how the kid got a hold of a knife, but he got a hold of a knife and he slit his finger. And he was bleeding everywhere, and so there was blood on the floor. But his mentality was not, I could get in trouble, I'm going to stay away. It was, Dad, help me. So this childlikeness, this being acquainted with our own brokenness, this is healthy stuff. And I encourage you to dive into it. Dive into your brokenness with Jesus. Sit with Jesus and say, here's where I'm broken. Here's where I need help. And he'll show up. A couple more and we're done. I also encourage you to read Psalm 46 in your own time. There it is on the screen if you want to see it real big. Psalm 46. This meme says, when one door closes, another one opens. Other than that, it's a pretty good car. That is hilarious. This meme says, my two hobbies are smoking marijuana and rescuing stray cats. Also hilarious. This is a meme from the famous comedian Steve Martin. It says, thankfully, perseverance is a good substitute for talent. I've been reading his autobiography, and I've come up with 3 little notes to make. I'm going to skip some of them for time reasons. Yep, I'm going to. I want to encourage you to look for the coming surf, and here's what I mean by that. At one point in Steve Martin's career, I'm going to walk down because I can. You got this on the joystick back there? At one point in Steve Martin's career, he was, really, it's fascinating how discouraged people like Steve Martin have been consistently throughout their lives and how much anxiety and depression he's dealt with, being one of the biggest comedic names that we've ever known in history. But at one point, he had been on the Johnny Carson show multiple times, and he was starting to pick up. So his crowds were moving from like 3 in a crowd to maybe 100 in a crowd or 80 in a crowd. And he was doing his comedy act in front of about 100 college students on a college campus. And the room was set up where it was kind of like this room, where there's a stage on one side, and the crowd pretty close to the stage. And there were no doors. There was only one exit, and it was in the back. And so there was no green room that he could escape to after the show. And so when the show's over, he starts to break down his props, and nobody recognizes that the show is over. Like the lighting has not changed. He just has told his last joke, and he's done, and nobody's recognized it. And he starts saying things like, it's over, go home. And they laugh hysterically. They think it's part of the gag, is that he's still up here. And so he's like, I'm telling you, the show is over. They think it's hilarious. Until he leaves through the crowd, and he was in the habit in those days of actually working the crowd outside of the gig. He would bring them out and sometimes take them to dinner. I mean, he would do all kinds of wild stuff. He was a wild and crazy guy after all. But he goes walking across campus, and this crowd of 100 college students follows him like a herd. And he's like, leave me alone. And they're like, ah, ha, 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 it's hilarious. And at one point, they come to an empty swimming pool, and he says, all right, everyone into the pool. And guess what they do? They all get in the swimming pool. And he says, now I'm going to surf. And he jumps on top of them and crowd surfs across this empty swimming pool with 100 college students. And he tells this story from the perspective of this changed his comedy act forever. For two reasons. One, he now realized that he owned the audience. And that's powerful when it comes to comedy. And secondly, he realized that he could be far more wacky and far more physical in his comedy. And it changed his comedy forever. Now, when I say for you, look for the coming surf, here's what I mean is, Shay, it may be a hard time to be an educator. Kate, it may be a hard time to be a school counselor. And if you're in the medical field, it's a really brutal time to be in the medical field. And if you work for Humana, it's hard to work for Humana right now because there's so many various opinions and so on and so forth. And I just want to encourage you that there may be something really cool right around the corner. The thing that you think is useless, worthless, making life really hard, may be the very thing that transforms the way you approach being a school counselor. Like there's incredible opportunities to serve and minister to kids right here, right now, because of the hardship and so forth. 1 Peter says this, it says, don't be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you, as though something strange were happening, but rejoice, you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. The Message translates that same passage this way. It says, friends, when life gets really difficult, don't jump to the conclusion that God isn't on the job. Be glad that you're in the very thick of what Christ experienced. This is a spiritually refining process with glory just around the corner. I want to say new level, new devil. If you're going to do something important for God, you're going to face hard times. My wife sent me this meme, which I know was really hard to read back there, and I'm only going to read the really poignant part. It says, I used to think that if a thing was hard, I must be doing it wrong. The older I've gotten, the more I'm breathing in the understanding that all good and beautiful things in this world are hard. The really good things, those tethered to eternity, require the whole of ourselves poured out, require faithfulness every day, require a certain kind of optimistic grit that sees past the challenge to all that is being created amidst the struggle. You may feel like it's hard times. You may feel like you're just getting hammered. But whoever did anything really, really valuable that didn't get hammered? And back to the meme, it says, perseverance is a good substitute for talent. In Matthew it says this, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. Stick-to-itness is a virtue. Endurance is a virtue. Perseverance is a virtue. Having an iron jaw will get you through more fights than having a strong fist. In some sense, whatever it is that's weighing on you, your ability to get out of bed in the morning, to put one foot in front of the other, and to just keep swimming, as Dory would say, makes you a winner. And I want to encourage you to keep putting that foot in front of one foot in front of the other. And the glory of God will show up. The day of crowd surfing in an empty swimming pool will show up. Just keep going, and God will show himself.